Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Better Buildings for Humans podcast. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we explore the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our just general joy of being alive. And of course, we have to talk about sustainable design as well. I have something very special today, something I've been really looking forward to. I have Hamid Mohammadi from Good Place Design in Toronto. Hamid, welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate it.
Now, Hamid is an architect, an industrial designer, and an artist. And so it's going to be a lot of fun to explore, those various aspects of his career individually, but also how they cross over. And that's the most fun part. But before we do that, I have to mention that Hamid is also a Dalhousie grad, right? You went to architecture at Dalhousie. Yep. I went to chemical engineering at Dalhousie, so literally across that little short roadway between our two buildings. So it's really cool to get to speak to someone else who was at my alma mater. All right, anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about your pathway to Good Place Design. Tell us why you chose architecture, why you also chose industrial design, and how that path led to the creation of your firm.
For sure. Yeah, thanks again for having me. Excited to discuss this topic about better buildings for people. And yeah, basically, I've always been creative. I've always enjoyed drawing. I've always had that side of myself. When I was in high school, I actually was debating whether to go to architecture or industrial design. However, I went to my guidance counselor's office in Halifax. So I actually did high school and junior high in Halifax as well. And there was a pamphlet about the industrial design program at Carleton there. And it kind of spoke to me. I thought it was interesting because I could use my artistic skills, but also have some practicality to it in terms of getting a job, which is maybe just a practical way of thinking, but also, exploring that creative side because it is a very creative field. So I applied to that program. I got in, and I was about 18 at this time. So I moved from Halifax to Ottawa and started that program. It was a very broad program. So, we had courses like psychology. We had, in addition to our studio courses, we had courses in psychology, economics, physics, math, history, art history. It was just a very broad education. But the focus of my schooling in industrial design was the studio and was that aspect. And so there, I really think I learned how to hold concepts in my mind, draw them out, the iterative process, which is something that, has been spoken of in the industrial design field, but also used in business, used in architecture, used in a lot of different fields. So when I got to my fourth year of industrial design, I found I kept going to talks about architecture. The School of Architecture at Carleton is right beside the Industrial Design School. So I would always hang out there, be interested in what they're doing. And then, at that point, I just realized that I wanted to pursue architecture. I realized in my fourth year of industrial design that I wanted to be an architect, funny enough. So I moved to Toronto once I graduated school. My dad was here for a summer and he was working at Sick Kids Hospital. So I moved here. I got a place in Toronto. And then, my mom, brother, and sister also visited that summer. And I ended up making Toronto my home base, So I've been here. I live in Toronto, and I worked at a consulting firm, industrial design consulting, called Kangaroo Design. And then I went to a industrial design role within a medical device company. That company was called Sentinel Medical, and it was a startup by two master's level students. I was the 30th employee, and by the time I left 4 years later, it was about 150 people, and it got sold to this big American company. And so it was a very interesting experience. I feel like I really got to hone in and use my industrial design skills there. And even just seeing the startup process, seeing, how a company grows at that scale and being innovative with the medical products we were making. Their focus was breast cancer detection equipment. So then again, after about 4 years there, I realized it was time for me to pursue that dream that I had of becoming an architect. So then I applied to the Dalhousie program. And one of the reasons I applied to it is because with that program, you're allowed to have a background in any discipline. So you can do 2 years of any degree, and then you would basically be able to complete 2 years of their undergrad program and then 2 years of the master's. So then I did that Dalhousie program. I did a work term in Germany. I feel like there was a good amount of practicality as well as studio courses, and then another work term that I had done, I did in Toronto at Giannone Petricone Associates, which is a relatively large firm in Toronto. And that was a really good experience for me as well to connect with that office. And then in 2015, when I graduated, I moved back to Toronto, and then, I started working at different firms. So I've been now at this point working for over 10 years in Toronto offices, and I worked at a handful of different firms, some large firms, some small firms, and some of the larger ones would be like Hariri Pontorini. A smaller one would be, for example, this woman who is also a Dalhousie graduate named Nova Tayona. She had a small office, and it was just a few of us. And I also worked, in a 10-person firm called Ike Brochu. So I feel like I got a good amount of range in terms of studio sizes and that kind of work. And yeah, I also worked at a developer. So I had a different perspective, in terms of projects. That the developer is called Dunbar in Toronto. And I felt that I wanted to have my own practice, basically, to be able to merge my skills in industrial design, architecture, and art, to have a holistic view, to be a multidisciplinary practitioner, and to create good spaces for people using the design skill set and the creative skill set that I have. So that's just like a general overview of, how I got here.
That's wonderful. I'm extremely jealous when I hear people who sort of saw their pathway so young. It really is beautiful.
If it's plastic, it's a problem. Solarowall, the only translucent glass system in the world. For glaziers, it installs fast for better margins. For architects, it's a design you're proud of for years. And for owners, it's lasting performance and real return on investment. Visit advancedglazings.com to see if Solarowall is right for your next project.
Now, let's talk about the three disciplines. And actually, let's just focus on industrial design and architecture just for a moment.
Sure.
Do you have architecture clients and industrial design clients, or do you have clients that are both or all of the above?
At the moment, I'm focusing on the architecture aspect, and the industrial design pursuits are, I would say, self-driven pursuits. But I do feel that there is a connection there. And, I do use a lot of the skills that I was able to hone in on in industrial design. So, for example, rapid prototyping, 3D printing, the different software that I use, some of the methodology, the iterative methodology. I think one of the things that inspired me once I was done, or, as I mentioned in my 4th year of industrial design, was I will say, this was a moment. So Kareem Rashid is a well-known Carleton industrial design graduate. And I met him, personally. He came and did a talk because he was an alumni of the school, but also I read his book, and at that time that he had, and it was talking about design at different scales. So he's an industrial designer, but he's also doing, environments and buildings and public spaces and shoes and clothes. And so I think there was something there about his approach or mentality that was a bit liberating for me, meaning that you can design different things. You don't have to be limited to designing this one thing, or this is your niche and you have to stick to it. So I think there was something there for me about being able to, work at different scales and different levels. So yeah, that's what I found. Yeah.
You mentioned 3D printer, and I was kind of a little surprised about that, but I shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
Do you ever use the 3D printer in architecture?
Yes. Yeah. So for prototyping, even models, I think even details. Yeah. So again, I would say there's been a certain amount of maybe overlap or crossover. Like I think maybe the iterative practice was very much taught in industrial design. And I think, we see that in architecture as well. Rapid prototyping and these manufacturing processes, I think like 10 years ago, it was not as advanced. Now it's so easy to get a very high quality 3D printer. And, as an architect or even as an industrial designer, you can really start to see your ideas. You can make something that's so close to the real thing as an industrial designer. Or as an architect, you can at least model things, mock things up, as opposed to feeling like you have to make things by hand. And it kind of speeds up that visualization process or iteration process.
Is it common in the industry? Do you know? It's the first time it's come up in 120 or whatever episodes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
for
funny.
real.
That's
Yeah.
funny. So actually, that's a great question. So when I think I went to, there was a show about Zaha Hadid in
Yeah.
Guggenheim in New York. This is again like back in industrial design. And I remember going and seeing it because they kind of had her work going all the way down. So this maybe 2006, something like that. And she was using 3D printing in her design and her work. And so I think that some architects use it, some do not. And so, some firms I think would build things by hand, actually more maybe traditional way of like, that they would use wood, cardboard, metal to mock things up, but that is very time consuming. So, someone is able to employ the technologies that we have, it might help them in that visualization process or, speed things up. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. All right. I was just curious because I'm amazed that it's never come up. And of course, you should use it in architecture. It's brilliant. Okay. I want to read a line from your website. I'm just going to actually just read it word for word. The goal of Good Place Design is to create spaces, products, art, and experiences that elevate the mood of the individual and collective while allowing for meaningful connections to the natural world. What a lovely line. This is just a beautiful statement, and I want to explore it a little bit because there's a lot going on there. First of all, tell us how you create spaces that elevate the mood of the collective and the individual. Like what elements need to be present in a space to elevate one's mood?
Yeah, so I feel like things as simple as natural light can elevate the mood under space that responds and understands the circadian rhythm. So, there's a certain type of light in the morning and it changes, and then at noon, and then in the evening it drops down. So there's something there where I think even, today we can have bright light all the time, and that also can mess with our internal clock. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is the clarity of a space. So if you're entering a space that has a sense of clarity and could be openness, could be closed, could be intimate. I think if there's a clarity in the space, I think that is something that can elevate a person's mood. The other aspect is the materials used in the space. Are there different textures? Are you able to see how the space was put together? Do you see the structure? Do you see different elements of the space? Does the space itself inspire you? Or is it a white box? Or is it a cube? I think there's elements like that. Did someone care enough to put something into the space to surprise you, to, make that effort to inspire you in some way? I think those are some of the elements of it, but I think there are definitely more. And so I think we intuitively feel it. Yeah, absolutely. We feel it when we enter a space. And does it elevate your mood, or does it make you feel gloomy? Or, a lot of institutional buildings, I think they suffer from this. And what is the lighting like? What are the materials on the wall? Is it just the cheapest possible material? Or is it, did someone actually care to, make you feel invited? And I think that's another aspect, is feeling like we belong in a space can elevate our mood. So a lot of spaces are essentially transitory or transactional or commercial. So you're meant to be there to buy something or to move through, or, for some variation of that. But spaces where we actually truly feel like we belong, I think that's another aspect of it as well. So some public buildings have this. Obviously, the home has this, in a big way, being invited, to different public spaces or a friend's house. I think we understand when we're welcome in a space and it's meant for us, as opposed to a space that is kind of like pushing you through. So I think those are some of the elements that I think of when I think of elevating the mood of someone in a space.
I love that. That was
Thank
beautiful.
you.
I want to change gears a little
Sure.
bit here. We're going to stay on that statement, but I want to talk about your art a little bit. Can you just
Sure.
tell us, maybe describe for us the kind of art you create?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I've been drawing since I was a child. I was always interested in animation and the process of animation, how it was built. I used to love looking, even when I was like, I think grade 2 or 3, like looking at Walt Disney books, but they were the actual process of animation. So it was these like rough sketches and things that stood out to me. Throughout the years, I will say I was always encouraged by my parents, my peers, teachers to be creative, to pursue my creativity. So that is something I'm thankful for. I know not everybody has that, or, because sometimes, certain parents can be like, oh, be practical, go be a doctor or something like that. So I'm thankful that I was able to actually pursue this. And it was actually something that people encouraged me to do. Basically, I think, as I mentioned, when I went to industrial design, the drawing and the, way of putting together images is for a purpose. It's for a product. It's not necessarily an expression of the self. So after I graduated industrial design, I did kind of focus a little bit on oil painting and, making artwork but it wasn't anything, super serious. However, when I was in doing my architecture degree at Dalhousie and I was at the master's level, we had like one or two electives. So the one elective I did was a figurative painting course at NASCAD. It was a master's level course. And I feel like that really just sparked a lot of excitement in me because, first of all, the teacher, Suzanne Funnel, she was great. And there was just a lot of amazing things that came out of it. So it was figurative painting. So you're literally, sitting in front of someone, painting them. Within 1 or 2 hours, you've captured some kind of image of this person. And I think that once I finished, I always had this like sense of that I'm an artist. Once I finished my degree and started working in architecture in 2017, I decided to take it more seriously and I actually got a studio space. And basically, since then, I've had a dedicated art space. And so I've been able to develop my artistic style over the years. And I'm part of a group called the Kin Collective, and it's a collective of artists. And so in 2021, I did a residency with the Museum of Contemporary Art, and I had been developing my style, and I feel like that experience and being able to speak with one of the curators there, David Liss, I feel like he was influential in giving me a little bit of a nudge in terms of where I was trying to go. And I feel like the style that I have now and the way of working now is, something that comes from that. So the way I would describe it now is contemporary figurative art with a sense of positivity, optimism, and agency for the individual. And it has a lot of the themes of the, connection to nature, connection between the individual and the collective. There's a lot of themes that I feel like overlap between my architecture work and my artwork.
I love the themes of connectivity, and I'm going to talk about that right now. It was a perfect
Sure.
segue.
Thank you.
The meaningful connections to the natural world. First, tell
Yes.
me how you do that in architecture.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do that. So, for example, a connection from the interior to the exterior. So, in architecture, sometimes that's referred to as borrowed spaces, where you're looking out of a window into a landscape and you're bringing that inside. So, that's one aspect. And I think we all know if you're in a rural area, it's easier to be connected to nature, to be grounded, to be part of the landscape. Fundamentally, buildings are grounded, right? They're part of the landscape. But I think within a city or an urban environment like Toronto, it's a bit more challenging. I mean, of course, we have park spaces and public spaces, but how do we make sure that people continue that connection with nature and not feeling isolated from it? Because certain spaces, I think it again comes back to the wellness and health of the individual, and spaces that uplift people is, do you feel separated from nature or do you feel like you're part of it? I think it's important to have natural elements within a space. So what kind of planting is there? Is there a green wall? How do we incorporate that in even a sustainable practice like green roofs? Obviously, they promote pollinator insects, and even the materials that we use can make us feel grounded and part of nature. And elements like wood and brick and these clay elements, and make us feel grounded. So I would say those are some of the ways that it's integrated, is literally bringing elements of nature into the building in strategic and thoughtful ways.
Like that. You know what?
Like,
I think I have this a little further in the conversation, but let's do it right now. What about connection to the community? How do you do that?
yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally humans want to feel like they belong. I think
Absolutely.
yeah, that's an aspect of human nature. Traditionally, we've lived in tribes, if you look back hundreds or thousands of years ago, so there was some kind of community. Now things are so different. You can live in a big city and feel isolated or feel alone, or even though you have 1 or 2 million people around you, how do you connect with certain people? So I think buildings should also encourage this, encourage people to maybe meet someone new, to allow spaces for people to have those connections, to not feel isolated, to promote that sense of community. Because again, it's very easy, and especially, with a lot of, vertical buildings and things like that, for people to feel like they're kind of separated and a bit isolated. I think, yeah, it also comes down to a certain individual. I do realize, some people are a bit more introverted and social, but I think fundamentally, even introverted people, I think, like to have people around, like to feel like they're heard, like to feel like they're part of something. So, yeah, I think the buildings should also, set the stage for that, essentially.
Materials. You mentioned materials. Let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that. Are there any particular materials that you like to work with in architecture these days? Are there materials that you're particularly fond of in your current work?
I'm going to say brick, wood, metal, glass. And it
Okay.
sounds like every material, and it is. So I think there's a time and place for each material, and even concrete, of course, we can't forget concrete. But I think part of it is experimenting with the material and how can we be innovative with it, and even moving things forward. Like, for example, I went to a talk and this developer had literally built buildings, at least the concrete portion, with a 3D printed robotic arm. I mean, that was very much research based a few years ago, and now, some developers are actually doing it. They're embracing it. So, yeah, I think it really depends on the context, but I think as long as there's some kind of innovation and maybe some way of testing the boundaries of the material, but also in a thoughtful way, and again, making people feel welcome within that space. So a lot of warm materials like wood, brick, I think give us that sense of groundedness and belonging.
Are
Yeah.
there any that you're avoiding?
Ah, I would say the main thing I think is like if the material is true to its essence. So, for example, if it's something like a surface applied decal of something, and I think I'm less interested in that as opposed to something that's a bit more durable, solid through and through. I wouldn't say I'm someone, for example, like, we know Tadao Ando, the architect, he loves concrete. Like that's his material, right? So I wouldn't say I'm necessarily like that, like I'm just one material, but yeah, I think if the material is durable, true material, I like working with that. Yeah.
You must die in Las Vegas.
I've never been actually.
You've never been.
No,
You
I've
should
never
you
been.
should
Really?
go just for the experience of the superficiality. It's
Got
extraordinary.
you.
I sort of like the experience just knowing that everything is superficial, nothing is real.
Interesting.
Everything's entirely fake, but it's kind of fun. I don't know how to describe that any other way. It's just sort of fun to see all that, over the top phoniness. It is a wonderful experience.
It's like a theme park or something. Yeah.
It is, and you're in a theme park, so you're able to, suspend a lot of things that you would normally be very, uncomfortable with. But hey, it's
Yeah.
Vegas, so anyway,
True.
one of these days you should check it out just for
Yeah.
the experience.
Imagine a building where natural light flows freely, solar heat gain is under control, and comfort is unmatched. With Solera translucent glazings, you can create spaces that work better, feel better, and deliver lasting value. Learn how at advancedglazings.com.
This next question First, I'm going to preface it by reminding everybody that I am an engineer, right? And, when you start engineering school, they surgically remove the right side of your brain. It's just part of the process. Anyway, I read a little bit about your art, and I saw 3 words to describe it that I thought were interesting. That your work explores figures, movement, and optimism. You mentioned optimism earlier, too.
Yes.
Can you talk about what draws you to those themes and how they relate to your experiences in your daily life and your work experiences?
Absolutely. Again, I think it goes back to the individual and the collective. So how do we see ourselves as an individual within a larger group? So a lot of times when I'm creating art, I actually don't know the outcome of the piece, believe it or not. The way I'm working is just seeing what comes out. And this maybe just comes from, I guess, years of doing it, but I like to see what actually comes out. So it's, start with a figure and then build around that, and what are the relationships between all of these people. And the way that I, tend to draw a lot of these figures is in my own way. It's maybe a little bit like distorting the figure, but in a fun way. So it's not quite a realistic anatomy, type drawing. It's a little bit more fun and playful. But I think movement is because of body language. So there's a way that we communicate through body language that can't really be communicated through words. So sometimes when people see my art and, they see people kind of, doing like different movements, they're like, oh, it makes me want to move, or they imitate it. And it's that language or that reciprocity of seeing somebody do something and we kind of think it's fun and we want to do it as well. And then that also leads into the optimism aspect of it. And I think when I started getting more serious about my art in 2017, it was a time when I felt there was a lot of heaviness and a lot of darkness in the world. And maybe we're still there, unfortunately, and a lot of identity politics and division. And so I felt like my art should be some kind of counter to that, where I think life imitates art. We've heard that statement. So what if we condition ourselves to see the world in a more positive way, in a more optimistic way, as opposed to a lot of mainstream sources that might have maybe a negative outlook or, some kind of agenda or something like that. So I would say positive outlook. The optimistic outlook is something that I think is a helpful mindset to have. Obviously, we all see the world around us, but I think it's good to have that mindset.
I like that.
Thank
It's
you.
funny when you're speaking about, not knowing where a piece is going there. There was a line from a Tragically Hip song that popped into my head. I don't know if you're a fan, but it talked about a sculptor, and it says, "I've been carving you to see what form you take. You were hiding in ivory. I just wanted to free your shape."
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
that's cool, right? There's a definite alignment there. I like that.
Yes.
Your work was also described as universal. Is that a conscious choice in your work?
Yeah, so I would say the universal aspect is, again, going back to, some kind of counter to identity politics, because I feel fundamentally underneath all the layers of cultural and social conditioning, we're essentially the same, I believe. We want to be loved. We want to feel part of a community. We want to be able to show affection. I feel like these are some fundamental things. We want to live in peace. I think there's a lot of things that if we strip away a lot of layers, people are fundamentally the same. A lot of people are. And so I didn't feel the need or the desire to necessarily make my art of a specific culture or of a specific country, or, what I wanted is for anyone to look at it and say, that's for me. Like, I belong there. That is made for me. And so, I even did a projection. It was a public art projection in Toronto, and it was, in collaboration with the city of Toronto and some other groups. And I went and looked at it, and then there was this woman, she came up and she was like, "Oh, I feel like that one is like me." And I'm like, perfect. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, is like, I want you to see yourself up there, and, and these people in their moment of happiness or optimism or movement or joy, like, I want you to feel like it's made for you. So regardless of, age, gender, race, walk of life, I believe my art is meant for everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, we've reached the part in the show where I ask my $1,000,000 question. Okay, and I ask it every episode, every single episode I've asked it, and I ask my guests to answer from whatever perspective they'd like. Okay, so here goes. What makes a great building?
I think a great building is one that pushes some kind of boundaries. It's showing us a new way forward. I think when we think of truly great buildings, they've done something that was unexpected, that was new, that was not a repetition of, what was done before. And it shaped, I think, that social interaction in a meaningful way, or the way that people interacted with the building in a meaningful way. And I think a lot of times this also can be a material exploration, but it can also be something that's significant in the sense that a building existed. It used to be an old industrial building. Now it's been repurposed. I think that can also be very interesting as well, because buildings can last for hundreds of years. And so as time evolves, maybe they change as well. And, I visited a lot of buildings. I think, when I was in Dalhousie, I think I mentioned I did a work term in Germany, but I would also travel basically every weekend. And I was trying to go to all these different cities like Paris, Rome. I went to the Swiss Alps because there's a really famous spa there. It's called Val's, Therme Val's. So I went to see a lot of these buildings that were kind of showed to us in textbooks, and I wanted to experience them for myself. And I think something that's common is that they did something new. They created a new path forward. They are relevant to the society that they're in. They're giving something to that society. And of course, they evolve over time. So, it might have been intended for one thing, but 70 years later, it might be something else. So, I think those are some of the elements that make a truly great building. But I think there's more too.
A wonderful answer. It's interesting. I mean, this is, I don't know, about episode 120 something or episode 130. And I've been asking that question every episode. And I keep waiting. I'm going to land on a place where it starts to get repetitive. And it doesn't, no matter how many times. People still find wonderful new ways to describe what makes a great building. And so it just keeps being such a fun question. And thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
Before we go, first of all, let's make sure people know how to find you. Can you tell us what your website is or how someone would get a hold of you?
Sure. Goodplacedesign.com. On Instagram, it's Good Place Design. Good Place Studio is my art practice. And those would be the best ways for people to reach me. If there's any, aligned and meaningful collaborations, I would be very excited to do that and happy to hear people's thoughts. And I'm interested in collaborating with people who are also interested in innovation, wellness, making good spaces for people, having a meaningful impact on the built environment, pushing forward our industry, the construction industry, the building industry. I mean, obviously, everyone talks about the importance of housing in Canada. And so I think this is something, we do have to collaborate and we have to work together to achieve a lot of our goals. So, in these discussions, and I'm happy to have more of these discussions and do my part. Yeah.
I mean, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Joe. Thanks for having me.
All right. You take care.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.